This is Canon Fodder, episode 52, live from Mars. Joining me this week is science fiction author, science fiction expert, and Twitter poster, Mr. Isaac Young. Isaac, how are we doing, sir?
Very good. Thank you for having me on.
So, last time I had you on the show was to discuss another work of sci fi. It was Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I wanted to give you a chance to talk about something that you liked instead this time because coming out of it, I was like, we were both pretty lukewarm on it, and I could tell you weren't as excited to discuss it. So I'm hoping that this time I'll give you something that you can really sink your teeth into.
Well, I wouldn't say I hate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by any means. It was more a matter of I enjoyed it all individually, but the final product was something that left a lot to be desired. In terms of John Carter, Princess of Mars, yeah, it was. I like it a lot more in terms of it has a soul to it that Hitchhiker's Guide of the Galaxy doesn't.
Mm,
And the interesting thing about John Carter in comparison to that book is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was written by a above average clever midwit, whereas John Carter is, it's not near as witty in the prose as Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but it's incredibly earnest and heartfelt,
mm,
and it speaks to something of the masculine spirit that Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy can't even comprehend.
definitely. No, I would definitely agree with all of that. You have John Carter, who is a Confederate veteran. He is a gold miner and also he's a frontiersman. He after the Civil War he moves out west to stake his fortune in gold, and escaping from a band of Apaches, he is transported to Mars. Already, I'm already hooked by page three. Before we get to that though, in my edition, I have a Del Rey, kind of like those cheap sci-fi paperbacks that they had, and I don't know if your copy has the foreword by Burroughs himself, but I really enjoyed that part of him just doing the setup, especially this came out in 1912. Uh, I think it I think it was serialized in 1912 and then might have come out as a book a little later. But just him setting the mood by saying, "Oh, this is my uncle Jack's stuff, and he told me 21 years after his death to publish it. So here's the actual story," and just grounding it in a way that, while not believable, at least there's a little bit of plausibility there, right? Because especially in the early 1900s, we didn't know what was going on with Mars, right? It was just maybe either a few years before, a few years after we had Tesla saying that he was communicating with Mars. We had the War of the Worlds broadcast from Orson Welles. I think that's in the 20s, right?
Yeah, I would definitely say I'm not. I can't recall the foreword. I remember elements of that are picked up in the movie John Carter, but I can guess at the context.
Yeah,
But
so
it,
Edgar
it
Rice Burroughs as himself, he kind of gives a little preamble to the whole story as uh, my uncle Jack was a Civil War veteran, and he wrote down these stories. And he told me after when he died, he told me to put him in a tomb. He doesn't age anymore, and that he's going back to Mars. Like that, all of this happened more or less. Uh,
yeah, it's sort of that it's that drop of enchantment into reality that you want to believe it's true.
right.
I'd say that's what makes that section particularly compelling. Um, it's something that you want to believe happened to somebody. And the interesting thing, because I specifically remember this from the book, is it says, "Oh yeah, John Carter, he's a man of 30 or abouts, and he's always been a man of 30 or abouts." He's some sort of like even before he goes to Mars, he's some sort of ageless immortal. And
Right.
I was expecting any of the sequels to pick up on that, but no. We apparently John Carter is this archetypal man out of time rather than a human being. Well, I
Would
mean, a full human being, I would say.
Would you mind if I read the last 3 paragraphs of the intro?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. He directed that I remove his body to Virginia without embalming, and that he be laid in an open coffin within a tomb which he previously had had constructed, and which, as I later learned, was well ventilated. The instructions impressed upon me that I must personally see that this was carried out just as he directed, even in secrecy if necessary. His property was left in such a way that I was to receive the entire income for 25 years, when the principal was to become mine. His further instructions related to this manuscript, which I was to retain sealed and unread, just as I found it for 11 years, nor was I to divulge its contents until 21 years after his death. A strange feature about the tomb where his body still lies is that the massive door is equipped with a single huge gold-plated spring lock, which can be opened only from the inside. Yours very sincerely, Edgar Rice Burroughs. So yeah, I wanted to make sure I took some time to appreciate that at the outset, because it really it sets the tone. It's, as you said, it's earnest, and I'm a big fan of Art Bell and like the early Coast to Coast AM days, right? And I was listening to an episode today uh like he had a time travelers open lines where anybody who's a time traveler can call in and explain what's going on in the future. And obviously anybody who's listening to it knows that it's silly, but people want to be fooled, or at least want to be uh they want to have that belief, like a child believes in something. And I think that's something that modern science fiction is sorely lacking, is a seriousness about itself.
I would say it. The problem, I don't think, is necessarily in that it's taking itself seriously. I think it's lost that joy, that excitement, because it's all. Just watching The Expanse, and it's a realistic air quotes
Mhm.
science fiction series, but it's lacking that kind of adventure. I like to say adventure is the wrong word. I really don't want to have to default to saying that it's sort of like Game of Thrones, where everything's sort of cynical, but it sort
It
of does get
it
at
it
that.
has been described to me as Game of Thrones in space, which, you know, I watched the first 2 seasons, and I read the first book. It was fine, it was okay. It's not like, Battlestar Galactica, or even like Red Dwarf, or some of these like really good science fiction shows. Uh, Star Trek Deep Space Nine comes to mind as a really good sci-fi show.
Mm.
But we're not here to talk about that.
Yeah, we're
We'll,
not
we'll,
here to
we'll
talk
get
about.
back to John Carter, and we'll probably discuss the atrocious film uh, a little bit later. So John Carter, he's escaped some Apaches, and he's transported to Mars, which the Martians themselves call Barsoom. He runs into the green Martians. There are 2 different species of Martians: the red Martians and the green Martians. The red Martians are kind of they're more human looking. The green Martians are more alien looking. So we kind of already have our these different factions that live on Barsoom. Uh, John Carter will eventually fall in love with a red Martian princess, Deja Thoris, who, at least in my copy of the book, she's always depicted as basically naked, except for all the jewels that are adorned on her. So very much of the style of the time, in terms of like pulpiness and those sort of risque covers that you you were using to get young men uh, to buy your books, right?
Hey man, it's just Martian cultural differences, all right?
Hey, I mean, I wouldn't want to offend, but it's funny.
Uh,
It's funny because it's like literally every single depiction that I've seen of her, it's like her breasts are completely exposed, except there are like diamonds on her nipples. I don't know. Very fun, I guess. Sci-fi writers need to have more fun these days. And yeah, so the story is basically Deja Thoris is the princess of the Red Martians, a city-state called Helium. John Carter has to transport her from one side of Mars, controlled by the Tharks, to the other side of Mars so they can get her home. On the way, they fall in love with each other. Not a very complicated plot, but for the time, just a good swashbuckling sort of adventure. Because of the gravity on Mars, he has super strength and super speed. It's the ultimate, superhero fantasy living on a different planet. I don't know if you're a big comic book fan. There's one of my favorite characters was, oh geez, what was his name? He traveled to the planet of Ran. I'm gonna look it up real quick. He's one of my favorite characters, and that's why I know so much about him, right? Adam Strange, that's it. Yeah. Anyway, Isaac, what do you think of anything that I might have just said? I'm gonna cut this out and go here.
Well, the thing that immediately struck me when I started reading John Carter of Mars was how pre-modern the character was compared to modern depictions of masculinity. John Carter is a man who knows what he wants. He goes after it. He doesn't second guess himself. He's not filled with doubts. He's not even filled with cynicism. And that's the thing that really makes him unique in terms of characters, because he's a fighting man. He's a soldier, but that's not portrayed as a tragic thing. I think even
there's no post-traumatic stress with John Carter.
Not at all. He war is his vocation, and it's stated so many times in the book that this is what he is born and bred for, essentially. Whereas we take a look at modern depictions of soldiers, it's still it's portrayed valiantly in the best of lights, but it's still portrayed with this tragic aspect, this huge burden. You come back home and you're just a broken man. War breaks people. And you never see that other aspect, which I find very interesting. Whereas in John Carter, he lunges into battle. Like he's not bloodthirsty by any means. I mean, he's depicted as an honorable man, but there's something about combat which his spirit maybe not yearns for, but actually I will go so far as to say, yeah, yearns for. That is an aspect of masculinity that's utterly lost today.
So one thing about John Carter, so one thing that I'll say about early 20th century and even up to like the 1950s, especially in the Western genre, which this book starts out he's moved out west since the Civil War to basically rebuild his own life. One imagines that he, as a Virginian post-Civil War, doesn't really have much to come back to. And you see this a lot in the Western genre, where a Southerner is the main character of the story, and he's forced out west in order to rebuild a life for himself. And you have to be a hard sort of man in order to do that, because the Wild West is unforgiving. Even more so when you're transported to an alien world and you become basically the warlord of a small city-state. So yes, there's much to be admired about John Carter. First of all, he's like 6'2", 6'3". He's got gray eyes. He's an excellent warrior, and he kills these green and red Martians almost, I don't want to say too easily, because he does get a few scars here and there, but you did mention that war is his vocation. and maybe bloodlust is a good word for it. I think there are certain times in the book that you could say that he's bloodlusted, especially when he's trying to protect the princess. Again, this is, Edgar Rice Burroughs is not reinventing the wheel here. He's more he's more taking established tropes of, say, the knight in shining armor and putting it in a science fiction sort of setting.
Yeah, I would add that it just so happens that on top of being an excellent warrior, he kind of gets superpowers on Mars because of the lower gravity.
Yeah.
So he goes from OP to just overpowered.
Right. It's like he's like a video game
Ultra
character
overpowered.
that just has all the cheat codes unlocked.
Yeah. If only we could go to a planet where we were magically Supermen.
One day.
Yeah.
So I brought up Coast to Coast AM before, and I'm going to bring it up again. Have you ever listened to that radio program by chance?
No, I haven't.
Oh, let me tell you, it is a trip. Art Bell was a radio host from like the 1980s all the way until like 2015 or something. I think he died in 2018. And he hosted this show, Coast to Coast AM, which was like the fringe show in the middle of the night. So a lot of truckers and people who stay up late would listen to this guy, and the wild callers who had all these stories of being abducted by UFOs or being time travelers. And sometimes he would have guests on. Like he would have this one guy, his name was Ed Dames. I think he's still around, but he was apparently a major in the United States Army who was trained in the art of astral projection. And I only bring all that up because that is the method in which John Carter is transported to Mars. So I'm very... You can see whether it's people who are, either kind of crazy or making stuff up, or maybe Edgar Rice Burroughs was tapping into something, or he'd read something somewhere about, let's say, magic or the darker arts. His fingerprints are all over the place. I brought up Adam Strange before, which is basically like a Buck Rogers meets John Carter sort of character. There are Edgar Rice Burroughs' influence, especially in the John Carter series, is all over the 20th century. I think even Carl Sagan said that John Carter was his favorite book.
Yeah, and it's sort of, from my perspective, it's an easy mechanism to reach for when you don't have something quite as believable as spaceships just yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I just it just happens to be on top of mind because it's one of the podcasts that I listen to during my drudgery and rereading A Princess of Mars. I thought, oh hey, look at that. Yeah, so like I said, a short book. I don't know if going over the plot is necessarily is necessary. I just wanted to get your take on a few things, and then maybe we'll discuss the movie or what. Here's a question, Isaac. What have you taken from John Carter, would you say, as a science fiction writer?
I would definitely say that number one, that pre-modern aspect, because I think that goes underrated. Because until I like sat down and read John Carter, I don't think I have ever encountered that archetype in any other fiction that I have ever read, or movies I've watched, TV shows. There's always some sort of thing that's holding back the masculinity, curbing it back, or there's always some broken component in the man. Either he doesn't know what he wants, he's immature, he's too brash, he's not listening to women. That's
right.
That's a very common trope.
One could say that in modern media, John Carter would be the villain.
Yeah, he definitely would be. He's so unrestrained. And there's so much sincerity to the character that, if even if he wasn't the villain, he'd be made fun of for that sincerity. I mean, I
Yeah,
think his
millennial writing wouldn't know what to do with John Carter.
his
They'd get Timothy Chalamet or some like twinkish actor to play him, and he'd be like winking at the camera the whole time.
that, or they would play up his devotion to Deja Thoris as being he's they'd play up that romance as him being under Deja Thoris's thumb, basically, and she's the girl boss behind the relationship. Whereas, in the book, Deja Thoris is, and this gets another thing I want to talk about, in terms of pre-modern archetypes, the archetype of the feminine in this manner, because in a lot of modern writing, the damsel in distress trope is viewed as outdated, backward, and doing a disservice to female characters. Deja Thoris is treated as a hyper competent individual in tremendously bad circumstances, and she is a damsel in distress in terms of the bare bones of that trope. But there's so much more to the character, because she embodies this honor and this sort of grace under pressure in a feminine manner that I just don't see in modern fiction.
Yeah, could you say that that John Carter is the first passport bro?
I'm not familiar with Passport Bro.
Oh, there's in like the sort of red pill culture, it's guys who will go overseas to find a wife because American women are no good.
Yeah, you could probably say that.
Yeah, it's obvious, and obviously he has to go a little bit further than Earth to find his feminine equal, let's say, because they do one thing. You don't see the sort of bickering back and forth that is like cliche these days, where the woman has a lot of opinions and the guy just, even in like Clint Eastwood movies, that kind of is the case. And Clint Eastwood, who's manlier than Clint Eastwood, let's say, right? But no, they're very complementary to each other. They're both understanding the severity of their situation, and she's very beautiful. She's written very feminine, but she doesn't have that sort of Earth woman feels over reels sort of thing. She's almost too logical. If I had to give her, and if I had to say she had a flaw.
I mean, if I had to describe Deja Thoris, I'd probably describe her as an ancient Roman queen, almost. That's probably how I would best describe her as.
Yeah, she's the product of good breeding, let's say.
Yeah, definitely say that.
So in 2012, Disney came out with a John Carter film. It was supposed to be like the biggest film ever. They spent a ton of money on it, and nobody went to go see the thing. A lot of people blame marketing. A lot of people blame the movies that it went up against. What do you think is the reason that the film failed? And do you think we'll ever get another shot in making a John Carter film, or maybe like a series or something? Because it is public domain. Like anyone can pick this up and do something with it.
Well, I guess I'll answer the second question first. There's no one in the mainstream media who's going to pick up John Carter. At least no one in the mainstream media who's going to pick it up and do the series any form of justice. So
yeah, I'm wondering if maybe it's better left for to gather dust until top men of the future can do something with it.
Yeah, it would. In order to get a good John Carter film, we're gonna have to wait a long time for right-wing movie studios to gain traction. And get that kind of funding they would need to create a good John Carter movie. That is, the Disney movie. I agree, it has a lot of flaws, but in terms of presentation, I struggle to imagine a right-wing movie studio doing better than that. And that's unfortunately, I think that's what a lot of movies are going to be compared in the future, is just how good they sell their graphics. I still think we're in a bit of a cultural rot right now, where people care a lot more over prettiness over substance. But that's just me. The first question, why I think it failed. The problem is the John Carter movie kind of came out a little bit before my time. And I certainly wasn't on, I didn't have an ear to the culture back then. If I could hazard a few guesses, my first guess is John Carter wasn't, maybe it didn't have the mainstream sort of buy-in that would make people hyped like they were for something like the Avengers movie. Maybe that was a bit too niche to turn into a major franchise. I unfortunately, I just wasn't. It was before my time.
Yeah. So apparently a lot of people went to go see it. It was just so expensive to make that it would have had to have cleared. It would have had to be like an Avengers style movie in order to even make somewhat of a profit. So in that case, I guess it was kind of doomed to fail from the beginning, which is a shame because it is a fun story. I don't know, Isaac. Is there anything that you specifically want to cover?
Yeah, I mean, like you can immediately tell. You can immediately tell that it's a more modern story by the way John Carter's treated as he was in the books. Like I remember when I was going back to that movie, the first time I watched that movie, that was before I read the book. I immediately thought, that's a good movie. Second time around, and you immediately notice how many times John Carter's humiliated in that movie in the start of it. You meet like in the books, what happens is he gets transported to Mars. He knocks some head. He's immediately a respected leader. In the movie, what happens is he's thrown in with the infants. He's washed and cared for like a toddler. And he starts out at the lowest rung and he sort of works his way up. And I think that's part of that pre-modern to modern transition where you had heroic men who acted heroic to a more modern transition of unheroic men becoming heroic. And now we're kind of stuck in this unheroic men are unheroic kind of period in our culture right now.
Yeah, there's very few people or very few heroes for young men to look up to. And if you, dear listener, have young men in your life, son, nephew, grandson, wife's son, get him to read John Carter. Get him to read Edgar Rice Burroughs. He also wrote the Tarzan books. The Tarzan books are much the same, sort of pulpy, short novels that are easily consumed and give young men an imagination. Yeah, I would definitely recommend, and I'm sure Isaac, you would agree with me there.
Yep. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not as well versed in the Tarzan books as I ought to be. I'm much more familiar with John Carter. I was going to talk a little bit more about the books if you wanted to transition that way.
Let's go back to the book.
So, one thing that immediately struck me about the book is it contains a lot of lessons which seem very simple in their teaching moments in the book, but I feel like are a very good guide for young men. So when John Carter's inducted into the Greenskins society, basically you get a picture of might makes right and this use of force, which borders on, I would say, a tyrannical use of force, where they, basically it goes so far as they beat their own animals to make them obey. And John Carter, he's navigating this strange alien system where violence is the rule of law. And he forms a relationship with one of the creatures called Wulan, who's basically as I recall, a mount. And basically what happens is John Carter shows reciprocity to Wulan and actually takes care of the animal. And immediately you have this creature that was the semi-intelligent creature that was supposed to supposed to guard John Carter, like the Greenskins put the creature to make sure John Carter wouldn't run around or get out of sight or whatever. Instantly, like a snap of the finger, the creature's loyalty shifts over to John Carter, and it reflects this healthy reciprocity even in a violent culture that reflects a much healthier view of just male dynamics, even though it's with a man and his pet, where you have, I mean, nowadays the way our culture views masculinity as just violent force. That's all it is, violent force at its worst. Where John Carter, you have a sort of kinship, a brotherhood that forms, and there are other characters in John Carter as well besides the male. But that was what struck me immediately.
Right. One could say, he brings a level of civilized masculinity to this sort of savage land. He's coming directly from the Civil War. He's coming from the Old West. John Carter definitely had a horse, and if dogs are man's best friend, then the horse is like right below the dog, let's say, in terms of how men feel about certain animals. So yeah, John bringing this mutual not respect, but this devotion and understanding and this sort of husbandry to Mars, yeah, totally tracks with how a man should treat the creatures under his care. We used to call that stewardship. I know you yourself are a Catholic, so you understand that Adam and Eve were given the earth to steward, and that's our call today as men, not only to steward our families, but to steward the land around us.
Yeah, and it ascends from there because it begins Carter's introduction into this society, his taming of it, rising to a leadership position of it, and then he's reintroduced to civilized Martian society with the introduction of Dejah Thoris. And he sort of has to leverage these two worlds to get at the hand of Dejah Thoris. And what's interesting to me is that, like, John Carter, the book, puts forward Martian society as strangely honorable. Like, for example, there's no thievery, as I recall, in that society. There's no thieves. People just leave their possessions around, but they'll murder you at the drop of a hat.
Right. I remember reading that part where he's wearing somebody else's armor, and he took armor from his prisoners, which you're not allowed to do. Only if you kill them can you take their stuff, basically.
It's this sort of hyper honorific tribal society raised to a city-state level.
Right. What one can kind of look at it almost like a sort of Homeric callback to, because in the Iliad and all that, you have the arms of Achilles, right? Patroclus is killed wearing Achilles' armor, so Hector then takes the armor for himself. That kind of ancient masculinity that is so foreign to us today. Yeah, no, that's a good read.
Yeah, and it's sort of the interesting character beat, I think, in terms of the romantic relationship, is John Carter's at this point. He's gone from a nobody to a leader, and he's broaching into Martian society. And Dejah Thoris comes in. She's basically his prisoner. They fall in love. And at one point, he broaches the option, because Dejah Thoris, at this point in the book, she's betrothed to another. And that basically, their marriage pacts are serious. John Carter can't even go and murder the guy because it would be sacrilege.
Right.
And he refuses, even though this is a completely strange alien society that's foreign to him, and he realistically doesn't have an attachment to it, because he's an Earthman, he decides anyway to to not go through with the easy path of just seizing Deja Thoris as his own, but rather like uses his wits to orchestrate a workaround where he's really assimilating into Martian society. He's respecting it and he's integrating himself with it in a way that you don't see in typical narratives, because in most narratives what happens is the society has to justify itself to the individual, whereas in John Carter he gains a love of Martian society and integrates into it, not wanting to force it to worship him, essentially.
Right. He's not setting up little Virginia and his own enclave where they only speak English. It's a bad immigration joke. But no, I agree, and it's especially like later storytelling when it comes to Americans, and this has been around for a while. Mark Twain said that geography war was invented so that Americans could learn geography, like that sort of ugly American trope when it came to people going abroad from the States that you kind of see today. John Carter's not like that at all. He has reverence for the culture that he is trying to ingratiate himself to, and there's a reason that he's John Carter of Mars rather than John Carter of Earth. He is by the end of the book, by the time that he's brought back to Earth, he is more Martian than he is an Earthman.
Yeah, you can read the entire book as sort of a progression of John Carter from a nobody to John Carter at the head of Martian society, and a progression through masculine virtues attaining that.
Well, Isaac, like I said, John Carter, pretty short book. Unless there's anything else that you want to cover about John Carter of Mars, or rather, a Princess of Mars, I think we can wrap up, talk about your book for a little bit, and then we'll head on out.
I wish I we kind of got to the end of my subjects that I had written down too. Yeah, sure, we can transition over.
Sure. So you are a science fiction writer. You have 3 books out, I believe, or you have 2 books and you're working on one more. I know that you said you don't have elevator pitches ready, but if you could maybe discuss your first 2 and then your work in progress.
Well, I'll discuss my ongoing projects first, actually.
Sure. Yeah. Whatever you want.
So I'd say all my projects are dealing with the themes of collapse in some way. So I guess my first project is called Giga Heroes, and I was really fascinated with the deconstruction of superheroes in modern media, and how we went from Superman to, as a Boy Scout, the American way, this pinnacle of virtue, to a Homelander who is nothing more than a despot, a crazy maniac. Who's so emotionally broken it would take therapists 1,000 years just trying to sort through that mess. And I was really fascinated with that sort of trend of deconstructing virtue until there's almost nothing left. And I wanted to start a book at the point where the Boys show happened. Not as fan fiction, obviously. This is completely my original IP, but the concept of this decayed society where even the virtue of superheroes has all been but destroyed, and try and build something back from that. And that's sort of the premise of Giga Heroes, is trying to find virtue in a very fallen and decrepit world. And it deals with the same concept of celebrity superheroes, corporate sponsorships, all that good stuff.
All right, very cool. And how far along are you in Giga Heroes?
The rough draft's finished. I'm currently doing a revised edit to the manuscript. I'm hoping to have the book out in about a month or so. But you can read the rough draft on my Substack right now.
Perfect. I will make sure to link that. And actually, by the time this comes out, it might coincide with the release. just because we're building up kind of a backlog here. So I will definitely, if the book's out by then, I will link it and make sure that people know where to find it. You said you had a few other projects in the works as well.
Yep. My second project in progress is called The Domes of Calrathia. It's a dark fantasy book. What I really wanted to explore with that one was the problem of institutional collapse as it relates to just civilizational decline in general, and how to be a good man when everything is no longer worthy of loyalty anymore. And the book explores this character who's called Cirrus as he sets about a religious pilgrimage across this post-apocalyptic frozen landscape, fighting monsters along the way, trying to come at he's trying to come at a reason for being amidst all the suffering that's happening around him and the betrayal of everyone he's ever known.
That sounds compelling. When's this one dropping?
It's currently halfway finished. It's on my Substack. I'm currently working on the revision. That's the version of Giga Heroes is taking my main focus right now. Immediately after that, that's where the bulk of my effort is going to. And then my third project is called The Last Human. It's I like to work on a lot of things simultaneously. It slows me down a little bit, but I like to have a rotating.
Hey, I'm writing 2 books at the same time right now. I understand.
Yeah. And that one, I really wanted to focus on collapse as it relates to a people. So it's set in this post-human galaxy in the far, far future, where humanity takes the place of precursor races you see in a lot of other science fiction.
So kind of like the Forerunners in Halo.
Yeah, but instead of humanity as the underdogs, it's humanity as this ancient civilization that's burnt out, and there are only a few members left scattered in the stars.
Oh, very cool. I have actually the science fiction book that I'm writing right now is very similar to that. It's more like a human diaspora amongst the galaxy, and they're kind of an endangered species in some ways.
Yeah, it's the exact same in my book too. So I guess we're great minds think alike.
Yeah, we're drinking from the same well. It'll be a race to see who gets it out first. And
probably you. I've been very busy. And so that takes me to my published work, The Matryoshka Divide, which is my earliest work. I published it in 2022, I believe. And basically, the premise by Matryoshka Divide isn't so much about collapse as it's trying to explore the contradictions and ultimately downfall of transhumanism as a concept. And the main thrust of the story is there's a signal that's detected on the edge of the galaxy from a lost colony ship. An expedition is sent in search of that signal. And you have 3 different POVs who are all struggling with this idea of humanity reaching a technological singularity to the point where it has almost abolished itself. And humanity is teetering on that edge, and they're trying to figure out a new path forward.
I know a couple of people who have read the Matryoshka Divide who have reviewed it favorably. I haven't picked it up yet, but I certainly will since we kind of discussed it a little bit. And I recommend, dear listener, that you go out and follow Isaac on his Substack and pick up his books as they come out. You said that they're all available on your Substack, correct?
The 3 projects, the ongoing projects, are available on my Substack. Matryoshka Divide you can find on my Amazon page. The link is in my Twitter bio.
All right, terrific. Is there anything else that you want to shout out or tell the people about?
I also write a lot of cultural commentary on my Substack. It's not just a fiction site. I write a lot of articles regarding cultural trends, current events, all that good stuff too.
Yes. Your work on comparing libtards to bugs and the various memes that you have about Starship Troopers and Helldivers 2. Very, very good work. I'm wondering if maybe you'll do a John Carter essay now. that we've kind of discussed his masculinity in the void of masculinity that we have these days.
Yeah, actually, it's already written.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah,
All right. Well, hopefully, maybe we can coordinate outside and launch them at the same time.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate your thoughts on John Carter. Thank you for letting us know about your work. I am terrible at ending podcasts, so I will say insert ending here.